Hey guys, what's up? My name is Kirby and I am dressed appropriately for Halloween today. If you follow me on Instagram, my name is @Kirby Betancourt. I've been posting every day this week some of my favorite Halloween shots. So I'm going to show you guys today a full edit from start to finish of the image that I posted. I'm starting in Adobe Lightroom and then going to Adobe Photoshop and then showing you step by step everything that I did to get the final result. So here my friend Bree and I are standing out in the middle of a parking lot fighting some crazy wind. I know it looks kind of funny, but the reason I'm having her do this is because I had this vision to make her look like she was standing out in a forest that was full of fog. So when you photograph fog, it kind of turns white. So I thought it'd be cool to get her to hold the umbrella behind her face with the sun coming in to make it look like this white soft light is wrapping around her. So let's dive into Adobe Lightroom and get started. I'm starting out in Adobe Lightroom and going through a few of my favorite shots from this series. I'm going to be using the Polaroid 669 preset from the Visco Film Pack 03. Once I get that preset applied, I'm going to go over to my adjustments on the right hand side and up the clarity and down the exposure just a little bit to get the light a little closer to what I'm wanting it. I'm also upping the sharpening a little and then masking some of that out so it's only sharpening the edges of the image and not the overall photo as a whole. And then going back up to the exposure, downing that a little, downing the highlights and upping the shadows to give the whole image a little bit better range so that you can see detail in all of the dark areas. I decided that I liked this image a little better because she's looking directly into the camera, so I took all of my presets that I applied by hitting previous over to that image, and then this is the one that I ended up using. So I'm opening this image up in Photoshop and using the spot healing brush tool to remove some of the metal lines that were in the umbrella that she was holding behind her. I wanted the image completely white so that I could start with a blank slate. This tool works really well sometimes, and depending on what you're removing, sometimes it can get a little tricky. So I'm also using the brush and clone tool a little bit just to get that whole background nice and clean without any like blurs around the edges or anything. So I'm now using my burn tool and I have the range set to shadows. I'm burning all of the shadows that are already there and then also adjusting the shadows around her eye by burning some of the midtones just to chisel out her face a little bit more and give it more dimension. In my history tab, I'm going to the before and after so that you can see what the image looked like originally in Photoshop and then after I removed all the lines and darkened some shadows. So the process that I'm doing right here I did not end up using in my final image, but I'm leaving it so that you can see the creative process and how long it took me to actually get to the final result that I really liked. I'm holding down the Shift key on the keyboard and then painting in lines that I was going to use as dimension to look like a forest in the background. Holding down Shift while you freehand the paintbrush tool gives you an exact vertical or horizontal straight line, so that's a really easy tip to keep from trying to freehand it. So as you can see, I'm selecting everything that's white behind her, painting in another layer, and I was going to clip those trees to that layer, but just really didn't like the result that I was getting. I'm playing around a lot with that because this is all trial and error. Once I realized that I didn't really like the result that I was getting, I take a completely different approach. So here I'm going to open up my shape tool and add the nature shapes that are built into Adobe Photoshop. So I'm selecting just this tree layer and blurring it out because I want it to look like it's out of focus in the background behind her and that the camera is focused on her as the subject. So I'm going to do that a few times and turn the opacity of that down, adjust it to where it looks like it's leading away from the camera. Once I get it placed right, I'm also adjusting the tone of it because it did look a little bit green, and I'm adding some noise so that it doesn't look so much like a clip art shape and looks more organic and like it actually came from a real lens with noise in the file. I'm duplicating this, changing the thickness of all the trees because if some of them are closer to you and some of them are further away, you're going to have different shapes and perspectives. So once I get all those trees placed, I'm changing the blending mode and then totally deciding to keep it on normal. And then I'm erasing the trees that are going in front of her face to make them look like they're behind her. So once again, I'm selecting the background and then inverting my selection so I can get a little bit more of a clean, more detailed selection to erase the shadows that are going in front of her face. I'm playing with the trees a little bit more in the background, and even though I blurred them before, I'm now sharpening them to give it more of a lens effect and then making it look a little bit more dreamy. I'm erasing the layers that I made earlier that I'm no longer using and now getting to my favorite part of any image that I ever edit. I'm making a duplicate blank layer and then using my brush tool to paint some blue light that's coming in. I have the blending mode of that changed to screen so that it blends in really nicely to everything that's underneath it. I did rename all of my layers so that I could keep up with what layer I was working on at different times. So I'm doing the same thing now and adding purples and then changing the hue of that to where it's a little bit more pink magenta. I love doing this because it makes it look like there's some haze coming in from the background. So I'm turning those layers on and off so you can see what it looked like before and adjusting the opacity of those. I'm also going back to the trees and reducing some noise because I was getting some grain from adding noise earlier. So this whole process is a lot of trial and error, and usually the image that's in my head is vastly different from what I finally finish with. So this is definitely a learning process, and there's lots of back and forth to get it exactly how I like it in the end. So now that I have my light painted in, I am upping the opacity of the trees in the background just to make them a little bit more dark and shadowy, and changing the overall shape of them. The upper right hand corner is giving me a really hard time for some reason today, but I am painting in more light there, just doing some final tweaking. So I'm going to flatten my image here and do some overall adjustments of the image as a whole. I'm darkening the shadows and have my burn tool set to mid-tone still, and I'm also dodging some of the highlights in the fabric. I used Command U to bring up the hue and saturation and upped the saturation of the entire image. So I'm also toggling again in my history tab of the before and after so you can see how much of a drastic difference there is of the colors from whenever I started. So last but not least, I'm doing an overall color using my curves tool by using Command M on the keyboard shortcut. I'm making some S-curves with the blue and red and then adjusting the hue using Command U. So that's it. Here's what you can do with an image of a girl standing out in a parking lot in front of an umbrella and a little bit of Photoshop. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you found some helpful tips in this video. Check out some of our other videos where Justin and I talk about posing and lighting and show some behind the scenes of us on actual photo shoots. Like, subscribe, and peace out. Happy Halloween.